Hi all, I had a very interesting game last night. We were playing Watford at home, so Barnet Elizabethans versus Watford Chess Club, and they came out at full strength for a certain cup game, so this decides if you go through to the next round. So I was playing Duncan, who's a FIDE master on board 1. He's 219, so a bit higher rated than my peak rating, which is now 212 at the moment. I kicked off with e4. Chris had recently got a performance rating of over 2400 FIDE at the Isle of Man tournament, and unfortunately the opening, pardon me, I was playing white. The opening I kicked off with e4. He played the Sicilian. Unfortunately, this is the same opening choice that Chris was playing against a United States Grandmaster in the last round called Tarjan, T-A-R-J-A-N, not Tarzan, Tarjan. So Chris had been playing Tarjan with the black pieces and had followed this exact game sequence here. I thought this was an interesting idea, this bishop e3. It's been labelled by some strong players, such as I am Andrew Martin, as the ledger system, this early bishop e3. It keeps a flexible idea of queen d2, maybe bishop h6 and this sort of stuff. So it's named after like Andrew Ledger. He's the strongest of the three Ledger brothers, and he's been playing this a lot. It's not meant to imply you need tons of opening preparation against the Sicilian defence. So apparently, Tarjan played this exact same thing. Chris had played e5 here, queen d2, and now, okay, it looks as though this might be handy, but black plays this anyway, knight ge7, releasing control of the h6 square. Now already I think I go wrong slightly. The most common move is actually bishop h6 here. It looks simple and direct. For example, if we just take this as an example, if black takes, plays knight d4, this can be handled with either retreating the queen back or even casting queen side. Both of these are meant to be about equal. So there's 13 games in live, but with this, for example, where this is, okay, there's lots of variations out in the games, knight d5, f4, king b1, bishop h3. Lots of people have played from this position different moves. With queen d2, yeah, again, branches off into queen a5 or bishop e6, 13 games each here. So this is interesting, it's meant to be about equal. So it's not, majorly ambitious to get a huge advantage. But yeah, bishop h6 is the move. What I played is actually knight d5. I think this is potentially quite dangerous for white to do this, and I'll show you why. I'll put on Stockfish Kibitzer. Now, Chris correctly, I believe, took on d5 here, but I think his implementation could be sharpened here. I think here, black's best move is not knight e7, but knight d4. He played knight e7, so it still goes for the f5 square to get this bishop off. But knight d4 is really annoying, because immediately, what does white do here? If knight here, then almost bishop h3 is attractive, but I'm not sure that is such a big deal. White could castle, to avoid this knight fork trick. But black's already okay there, even with that move. But bishop h3 is a trick. But also black can just play knight f5 and go for the dark square bishop, and this could be later, unpleasant. For example, like this, it looks as though black's having a fantastic time here with that extra dark square bishop. Already a small advantage for black, I would say. This one with the bishop here for black. So it's not really a great opening sequence. What I played here with knight d5. This is a bit of a slip up, really, from a technical perspective. If I was playing this position again, I think bishop h6. Chris mentioned that in post-mortem. That's what Tarjan played, so that's the main move. Grandmaster Tarjan is about 2500. Played bishop h6 against it. So we vary there from his Isle of Man game. So he took here, but he played knight e7, so with knight f5 coming. But this does give me time to move the bishop. So I played here now, bishop h6. I thought, yeah, I've got to get rid of this bishop because it weakened these dark squares a bit. And already intuitively I thought also, if that's removed, then e5, this structure is slightly weaker. The bishop's adding a bit of solidity to black's pawn structure. He took here, queen takes. So in this position, for example, if queen g7 is quite a nuisance, could black afford to lose the h-pawn and castle queenside? If we test this, in the game knight f5 was played, but let's test if black tries to castle queenside. I think, for example, let's go with this. Queen g7, and say trying to nab the h7 pawn later. I think this is a bit of a nuisance queen here. Actually, it might actually survive to tell the tale because of f7. But we're looking at other stuff here to allow that. Also, I mean, let's have a look at queen here. Looks at b2. The queen could go back immediately. If castle's here, again, I think black's fine actually. c4. So it is possible for black to play this without actually having to evict the queen, it seems. I mean, in this position, for example, just offering the h7 pawn, queen takes f2. That's good for black. Great for black. This is starting to be dangerous for, well, g2's hanging as well. So yeah, it's not entirely evident that black needs to play the move knight f5 even here. So yeah, the engine suggestion is actually queen b6 or even bishop g4. So queen b6, yeah, looks like a very good alternative actually. What does white actually do? So looking at f2. Yeah, I mean, if the queen doesn't go back, this c4. I mean, what do we play here? Queen e3. It seems, yeah, this would be good, or queen a5. So anyway, the queen was evicted. It went back to d7. Now bishop d7 was played. Knight e2. I felt that if I tried to play like with h4, I thought it was pretty harmless actually. Maybe just h5 I thought, and then what am I going to do? I've just created some extra light square weaknesses. Surely that g4 square is going to be a pain later. So I didn't really even fancy playing like h4. So I played knight e2, queen e7. Now we castle both on the king side. I think it would be a ready-made attack if he castles queenside somehow. I think b4, yeah, just b4. That would be quite dangerous. Just trying to open up things there. So he castled kingside. Rook here, I thought staring at the queen would be a good idea, with f4 maybe later. Rook a e8, and now I was tempted. This is a bit of a pointless move. I was tempted to play this. I was looking at things like b4 for a bit. I thought b6, but I thought, hold on, if I play this, and he does play a6, then maybe this is interesting. Maybe queen b6 or b4. I mean, I thought this might be somewhat interesting to open up this b file, but it turns out this isn't. I mean, the engine doesn't think anything of this actually. c4. If I take here, rook c8, it seems, I've just wrecked the pawn structure actually for not much. This isn't good. The queen's on its own there. It's a bit of, it's pathetic. It's not really doing much. It's just losing, getting a bad position. Where actually black might be having bishop e5 actually coming up. The queen's protected by the knight. So it's a bit of a pointless expedition at this moment. I've basically, and he basically ignores it actually. He plays b6. There's actually there's an amusing line here. Now if I take, it's not just a draw. Actually I thought it might be a draw by repetition, but actually the queen can get trapped here. If we get this position, then in this position, can you see how the queen gets trapped? If I give you 5 seconds here, what would you play with black? 5 seconds to pause the video. There's a really crushing move here. If I give you 5 seconds starting from now, what would you play with black? Okay, just knight g7, the knight's going to exterminate the queen. It's not particularly good to have this position. So yeah, the queen just humbly retreated back. So I've basically just given him the move. That move isn't particularly creating too many weaknesses at all. So yeah, I thought, okay, the structure is not entirely symmetrical. I've got a space advantage in a way, but it's kind of blocking in the bishop. So I wasn't sure how to assess it. The engine assessment here is slightly better for black. He plays now a curious move, king g7, which is not really liked by the engine. I'm not really sure, apart from reducing king safety, what it really does, this move. It seems to be a sort of waiting move, but what does actually black do constructively here? It's a bit tricky maybe. Knight d4 is tempting. So there might be an idea of bishop h3, for example, trying to use this f3 square, or taking in an f5, and then black can maybe play f4 later. I mean, that's a more important point here. If c3, then taking... Now black can actually play, for example, f5. It looks very comfortable for black indeed. This position with maybe f4 on the cards for f3 to squish this bishop. Very, very comfortable looking for black. So it's not the greatest advert for an aggressive system against the Sicilian defense for a long shot. I think sometimes the advantage of playing an offbeat line is to try and get the opponent out of a comfort zone. But the thing is, unfortunately, he's played this line against the GM recently. He's comfortable with this opening. But yeah, King G7 doesn't help maybe the mission too much. Knight C3, Knight D4 now. I play F4, and this is about equal from an engine perspective, this position after F5. Actually, the suggestion of F6 just keeping things rock solid here. You see this E5 would be rock solid here. The way Chris played it, his slight risk taking with F5. I play now Knight D1 with the idea of kicking the knight and trying to reroute here where I exert pressure on D6 and E5. Plays Queen F6, I play C3, Knight D5, Knight E3, so I'm carrying on that plan. Knight C7. Now I get quite excited. I thought I'm on the verge of winning here. I thought he's missed the trick in this position. I'm not sure Knight C7, was that a mistake maybe? The engine suggestion is E takes F4 here. So this is meant to be about equal. This position here, about equal apparently. Nothing much in it apparently. But the way Chris played it with Knight C7 allows what seems to be a potential advantage for white. F takes. Now if Rook takes, then can you see what white plays here? If I give you 5 seconds, starting from now. Okay, there'll be Knight G4 here. Yeah, using that pin, forking these guys. So he plays D takes, and I play Knight G4 anyway, which is not mentioned at all by the engine. Even though it looks very attractive to play Queen H6, it looks to hit E5. He has got that D6 square though, so it's not such a big deal, actually, if the Queen H6 isn't doing anything. And if it's not such a big deal, other things need to be examined here. The engine suggestion is just C4 actually, or Queen E2. It's supposed to be a small advantage for white. But I played this, Queen D6, I go in with the check. And yeah, if you play this though, I mean this requires some accuracy. Here, this loses for black if you played King H8. I wish he did, because even Caruana recently left the rook kind of loose. Can you see how this loose rook can be exploited in this position if you had played King H8? I don't know if you remember that recent Caruana game, he played King G1 instead of King F1. Similar analogous position, but can you see what white plays here? If I give you 5 seconds here. Okay, just Knight takes E5 would exploit that slightly loose rook, because of, deflecting the rook away, the queen protecting the rook. Yeah, so no, he didn't do that. He played King G8, and then what am I left with here? Actually, black's fine. My knight has to retreat, and now he's concerned about Knight C4, but actually it seems. So he plays B5 here. Yeah, no, this is actually technically now. Black's more than okay here. There's a slight concern about this G-pawn pin though. Maybe I can put pressure on F5, and there's this loose queen on D6 to factor in here. I reinforce D5. Now the move suggested from the engine perspective is actually F4, and I think this is very aggressive. He played actually B4. Now B4 does allow me to try and use this G-pawn pin with bishop H3, so I'm threatening now. Bishop takes F5 immediately using that G-pawn pin. If he played instead F4, this is much more aggressive treatment of the position, and in fact black can even now play Rook F5 to threaten Rook H5, and this would force a concession actually. So he's blocked my queen's retreat in this line. What do I do about this? Bishop F3, G4, these look like moves which are not ideal. So this doesn't look like an ideal position, but it might be just about okay for white. Black has weakened that E4 square, so there's a bit of a downside to that potentially, but yeah, that's interesting. So but B4 was played. it does kind of lock down the queen side, and maybe later a rook or a queen coming to a6 could be a nuisance. Or in the end games, you know, rook a6 to attack a2. But yeah, this f4 line is more aggressive here. Bishop h3, so it seems as though this is a good move. This might be actually one of the best moves, bishop h3. The engine likes that. Move bishop h3. So concrete threats here, bishop takes f5, trying to use the pin on g6. Plays rook f6. And now I play another good move, I think, knight g2. The engine likes this, isn't it? Anyway, the idea of knight h4, and then again, renewing the pressure on the structure, potentially, or even knight f3 to hit e5. We see now queen f8, and how this question about e5 is brought up here. Is this actually weak if white exchanges off queens? I actually retreated, but the question about the e5 pawn is brought up. If queen takes f8, this might be better than queen d2 theoretically. Let's have a look. If takes here, then knight h4 now threatens knight f3. You see the rooks are not ideally for protecting e5 in this position, but here a move like rook a6 is a nuisance. And yeah, knight f3 though, in exchange for the a pawn for a centre pawn, not there, pardon me, is actually in white's favour here. It's hitting that bishop, so this is actually a big advantage to white in this position. For example, like this, d6, whoops, d7. So that's not palatable. So best, there's other moves here black can try, which are lesser evil moves. Rook d6. This is fascinating now. If rook d6 is a move, knight f3, and the idea is this knight sack for 2 pawns. This looks like a bit desperate actually, and it's in white's favour. So yeah, just the exchange of queens actually needed to be seriously considered. I thought about, you know, keeping the tension of the position or something. Such an intuitive declaration, maybe at this level, you know, needs to take a second back place seat to concrete calculation if e5 is actually vulnerable here. Even if e5 doesn't look as though it's immediately vulnerable, this knight maneuver casts doubt on it actually. That centre pawn could be one for the a pawn. This pawn is then crashing through as well. So yeah, queen takes f8. What does actually black do after queen takes f8? It's really is tricky. What have we considered? If rook takes, yeah, knight h4, king here to f6 might be an idea. This is probably the best thing to do. You know, putting the king here, and then this position looks as though black's doing great in many respects, because now threatening g4 potentially. So this requires accuracy. Like if rook here, then squish, I think, with g4 looks tempting. But the engine gives this as advantage for white. Knight takes e5, we're hitting d7. So this position actually is advantage for white. Yeah, I mean, raw calculation to assess this is needed. I mean, here, this position, what are the prospects really? It seems it's in white's favour from an engine perspective to play something like d4. And then we've got 2 connected passed pawns there. Yeah, this looks as though the prospects are more in white's favour, potentially, once the 2 connected passed pawns going. But yeah, very concrete calculations needed there, you know, after this queen f8, if taking on e5 is a good idea. I'm putting all this analysis in the description of the video. If you've got PGM view, you can do Control-C, Control-V in your own chess space to see all the variations. But yeah, queen takes f8 is definitely worth consideration here. Sorry, after this queen retreat, I played queen d2. Sorry, queen d2, retreating the queen. And he plays king g7, rook e2. I try and build up pressure on e5, and I've got a sight in mind of this diagonal. Queen d6, I build up, rook f7. Now b3, which is one of the top engine moves actually. It just logically, it seems logical to go for this. I get a bit scared here unnecessarily. I play this move, now knight h4, which has got a great idea of knight f3. So I'm seeing this idea like a gang up on e5. Remember earlier I said that black could have played f6. This didn't need to be at all an issue. And now there's also this is a useful diagonal as well. But I think the important thing to really notice here after queen f6 is that it seems that these pieces are in trouble to g5. And this actually caused me to react badly here. But I think it needs to be determined, again, calculation taking the first primary seat. Speculation about the pieces being lost or fear should take the back seat, I think. Because here, is black actually threatening g5? That needs to be really scientifically proven, true or false. And we can actually prove it's false here. Let's put a token move in. g5, there's knight takes f5 check in this position. And either this one or this one will do for exploiting that pin. g4 we just take. There's no way black can actually hold on to f5 here. You can attack the queen, we can take the queen and take on f5. So given that's the case, that g5 is not on the cards, the move here, it seems, the most accurate move here in this position, by a little bit, not by a huge, we're talking 0.3 difference, is actually the move queen b2, which I had been planning, but I didn't play here, because of this. Maybe this g5 scared me a bit. I thought it was okay to play knight f3 here, thinking he wouldn't really, surely he's not going to play e4, because there's this backfire surely on d7. But this is the very move that Chris plays here. And he said after the game he thought he has to play this now. I think he's right, because if he doesn't, then white will build up even more pressure now on e5 by playing queen b2 and creating two multi-firing pins here across these diagonals. This wouldn't be entirely pleasant to allow queen b2. Just to show this, let's say a5 is a token move. I know black wouldn't want to do that. So we get this optimal position where there's crossfires, there's huge pressure on e5. What does black actually do here? If e5, you can see the destructive power now after takes, and then simply d6. Yeah, so this is for we have takes here, then we just take here. It's crashing through. So unfortunately, I didn't play queen b2, and I kind of regretted it. Although knight f3 apparently is okay, but queen b2 is the absolutely. Now the evaluations are actually getting closer together. There's plus 1.87 for queen b2, and there's plus 1.77 for knight f3. The reason I say this, I lost a bit of sleep actually last night, thinking, why didn't I play queen b2? But in fact, it does seem as though knight f3 is fine as well. I think the problem is this now really calculation really must take the first seat here in this position after either knight f3 or queen b2. There is a way for black apparently to minimise the losses here, or not. No, it's pretty dire. But the engine suggests knight a8, one of them, or rook f7. This is pretty dire. What does black actually do? It looks like a virtually unplayable position. If knight a6, as an example, knight f3, e4, we take here. Now take and take here. Calculation is totally essential. In this position, either taking on e7 or e8. And this ending, which comes up in a lot of variations, is just good for white, potentially, because that knight's struggling to get a decent square, and white's going to be munching this e-pawn. So yeah, that would be great. That would be great. Yeah, I missed an opportunity, and I'm a bit gutted about it. But on the other hand, black gave the opportunity of the weak and e-pawn. He didn't need to do any of this with f5 earlier. So, and black had opportunities himself to have an advantage earlier in the game. So I'm not really sure. I think our ambitions might tell us something about a certain game, but the more you objectively analyse it, you see the opportunities for both sides. You get a more balanced perspective on the game. And both sides had chances in this game. It just so happens that, so e4 is becoming very critical here for black, this position. But I didn't play the optimal move. As I say, I'll fear instead of calculation for knight f3. So e4 now. But this position leads to some wild variations, some of which we looked at in post-mortem. the critical thing to start calculating is d takes e4. You see, it seems to leave this loose knight on f3. Let's have a look at some of this now. In the game, just to be clear, I played knight h4 in this position, trying to intuitively maybe, well, I was trying to set a trap with knight h4 for g5 d6, but we'll come to that in a moment. Because I wanted to provoke actually g5. Literally, I wanted to provoke it, but yeah. So I played knight h4 in the game. But let's have a look now. D takes e4 from an engine perspective is the strongest. Say taking here, taking here. Now in this position, if here knight h4 is possible in this position with an advantage, or even knight g5, or even queen f4, but this apparently is one of the strongest. If a g5 here, there's this tempo gain all the time on the f file. Rook f2 is fine. This is much better for white. That f5 square has been compromised. If queen here, knight f5 check wins the queen. If queen here, knight f5 check, it's just massive position for white. So that's no good. But let's look at also rook takes e4. Let's get a glimmer of rook takes e4, like this. This position with bishop takes d7, and we analysed in postmortem two alternatives. Quite a few of us. There was someone over 210. Watford's Venkat, first name Venkat. So he's about 210, and we're looking at this variation. Very interesting. This variation here, queen takes f3, where both sides have these dangerous passed pawns. Yeah. Now let's look at d6, e3. White has to be careful here in this position. Say check, king here. Now if white routinely takes on c7, then this is now equal at least for black after check. Here, e2. Doesn't matter about queening. There's queen f1 mate threat. What does white actually do here? It's actually tricky with this mate threat. And also I think we'd misanalyzed as well. I think we might have misanalyzed looking at this other fantasy variation where queen f1 we ignored for some reason, but e1 knight check. We were looking at this just for the record. This is also interesting because here queen h5, but yeah. I know I'm skipping queen f1 mate, but here knight d3 check looked as though this was good for white, but let's say this is all academic. This position here, yeah, white is actually winning this. In theory, it's like a mate in 15, but it's all academic because actually in this line, black has got that queen f1 mate threat, which we kind of missed all in postmortem. Yeah, it was late in the day. So black is actually threatening queen f1 checkmate. So my intuition maybe had alerted me to, you know, don't allow this dangerous pawn with this queen. But let's just go back for a moment. Apparently, this position is okay for white. Just about. If queen b2 check isn't played, but queen e1 is played. Queen e1. So this keeps an eye on these two squares. So e2 we just take on c7, and this is going to be good. These checks are going to, I think, run out here. It doesn't matter about the bishop being lost here. Now there's check and queen e5, and white should be okay. But yeah, so queen e1 technically is the move if this position had arisen. So say here, now the bishop can get out of the way, for example, and this should be okay for white. Apparently the best move is check here. So say the king moves here. Now queen f1 in this position, and this is a better ending. White just needs d7, so this is a better position for white if we can get this queen back. But this is still going to be good after queen f1. We've got queen f4 on the cards. So if check here, queen f here, the checks are going to run out basically, and we're going to have this situation where, you know, Queen F8 is also on the cards with a mate and 5. So basically, in a nutshell, with precise play, the Queen takes F3 line is busted. It does seem as though this is busted here if Queen E1 is played in this position. So these positions, they look scary, but calculation should take the first seat. I think that echoes throughout this game. Calculation must take the first seat to be able to play any of these positions, well, many of these positions in this analysis of this game. But also, okay, let's have a look at E takes F3. I think this is less of a concern for white. White can actually even just block the pawn now with King F2 and simply look forward to D6 here. The knight just seems to have very little prospects in this position. If we play Queen D6 and move the bishop back, white is now going to either take the pawn, or there's lots of rich alternatives here for white. Queen E3. This knight it seems to be worse than the bishop. Just to give an example, Queen F6, Queen E3, check. Yeah, the engine's giving up the pawn. I'm just following through the engine suggestion. Just Queen F4 would do here. This is good. If we reach this sort of ending, then black's on the back foot. There's a big passed pawn. Doesn't really matter about the blockade potential. This is just a better ending for white. You might not immediately agree with that, but you know, it is an extra pawn, and although the knight's got a seemingly nice blockade, this sort of position, apparently this is better for white. But actually, no, hang on, there's a caveat here. If the evaluation doesn't actually go up significantly, I'm leaving it to depth 30, then it might actually be a blockade fortress draw. So let's not say this with certainty, because the bishop is a bit of a dumb piece sometimes when it's stuck behind pawns of the same colour. This might actually be okay for black. All the pawns are on dark squares away from the bishop. I'm not entirely convinced actually this is winning now, looking at this, getting to this position. So yeah, what was that? So that was even in the E takes F3 line, which initially the engine sort of rejecting. The E takes F3 line for King F2, which is given as the strongest move. This might head to an end game, which is actually tricky. There's a potential here for a tricky end game. A pawn up for white, but the bishop kind of made a bit silly by its own pawns. Something to bear in mind anyway. Okay, so yeah, calculation and evaluation needs to be brought into the fore there for assessing that endgame properly. It's very difficult to actually evaluate that endgame. It looks as though the bishop might be silly. So anyway, I chicken out with knight h4. So yeah, knight h4. I just wanted to set this trap. If g5 here, this would be a disaster move. Either d6. I mean, this is good, sort of. Apparently e3 here. So if rook takes e3, taking on here, this is actually winning for black. Queen d4, f4, ouch, double attack. That's a disaster. Yeah, so that needs precise calculation as well. Even this apparent trap for e3. Apparently in this position, queen b2 is okay for white. So it takes, and now here, if takes here, then d takes e7. If the rook moves, then knight takes f5 desperado, and then because we're going to take on c7 after, and white's better. Okay. So I played that move. It's a sort of, I don't know if it's a silly chickening out of concrete calculations, setting a kind of trap. I don't know. I had some intuitive regret about all this after, but it really does come down to precise calculation a lot of the time, this sort of stuff. Yeah, very precise calculation. A lot of variations I've noted from before, from the d takes e4. You'll see in the description of the video. So anyway, e takes d3, and the game seems to fizzle here. He had about 4 minutes. I had more than 4 minutes. I had maybe more than 10 minutes actually. But the rook's coming off, and we'd already lost the match by this stage. We had too many losses down. It was a 6-board match, and I thought after knight e8 he's looking at a nice blockade, and to be honest, I offer the draw thinking I might even be slightly worse here, but the engine actually kind of likes this for white, this position by 0.32 here at depth 19. Stockfish likes this a little bit for white. It's gone to 0.28, 0.18 now at depth 21. It's about equal. I thought this was okay for black, more than okay getting this blockade, because also look at this diagonal, this a2 pawn could be weak. So I think, okay, the position's not terrible for me. I could play this on. I'm not losing or anything. So he's higher rated, he's 219, he's a FIDE master, he got a 2400 plus performance recently in either van. It was a good result really. There's a bit of drama, high drama. I think the most dramatic clearly is where there's this crossfire scenario with e5 looking weak here, where I think I'd seen this ghost of a threat, which wasn't really a threat, this g5. So the most accurate move here would have been queen b2. The wealth of complications later after e4 is what we most invested our time in the post-mortem after this e4 to calculate all this d takes, the ramifications here. This was most of the post-mortem attention of this game. It seems rook takes e4 might be the strong move from the engine perspective rather than f takes. Just as a quick reminder, bishop takes here in this position. There's now queen f4 using that pin there. So apparently this is okay for white, this sort of stuff. So you'll see that analysis in the description of the video. Yeah, a very, very complicated game, very, very complicated indeed. If we'd needed me to draw or win, I could play on here, but it seems as though black's mostly equal in this position. So I think this is a well-timed draw for in many respects against a very, very experienced FIDE master. So yeah, I hope you got something out of that. Comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.